You know, driving here tonight, I drove past an office of Battleground, Texas. It was boarded up. You know, where they had yard signs, there weren't any signs left. Because you only put up signs of candidates who win. I kind of felt sorry for him. I was tempted to go up there and put up a Greg Abbott sign. Maybe put a Ken Paxton sign up there. You know, a bunch of rich liberals from out of Texas invaded our state. They declared that Texas was a battleground. Well, we had a battle. And the men and women in this room, we won. We don't react real kindly in Texas to invading armies. And we welcome them returning to New York City or wherever they came from. You know, last week in the Capitol, I was walking down the hall, I ran into a janitor carrying a screwdriver. He was going to change the sign on Harry Reid's door. I stopped and hugged the man. I said, I love you. What an incredible election. What a breathtaking, phenomenal election in Texas, up and down the state, victories all across the state. Look at the senators-elect and representatives-elect we've got in this room. You want to talk about a stout bunch of freshmen, but your colleagues aren't going to know what's about to hit them. And nationally, if 2 months ago I'd come to you and said, we're going to pick up 9 U.S. Senate seats. We're going to retire Harry Reid. We're going to win governorships across the country, including Republican governors in Illinois, Massachusetts, and Maryland. You just said, Ted, you've been visiting Colorado and sampling your local agriculture. What an incredible, breathtaking election. And you know what? The elections here and the elections across the country have the same cause. And the cause of the people who we are celebrating tonight, the conservative leaders who stood up here, the men and women who are saying, we will not go quietly into the night. This is a dinner to celebrate you. This is a dinner to celebrate the power of the grassroots. The power of the grassroots to stand up, to speak out, to entrench power. You know, when Wallace was talking about all those mean, nasty things they're saying, gosh, that sounds terrible. I'm really glad no one would do that in Washington. But you know, he's right. That's the way the game is played. Is they play a game of inside influence. You know what? You want a bigger office? How about we simply have leaders do something really, really radical? Listen to the people. That's what y'all are here for. You are the face of change in Texas and nationally. Now, we are facing extraordinary times. There is an urgency in politics right now, unlike anything I've ever seen. Right now today, a majority of Americans believe that our kids will have a worse life than we do. 76% of Americans today say they believe our children will have worse lives than we did. You know that has never been true in country until right now this instant. That may be the most un-American idea you can imagine. For centuries, the Central American understanding was that our kids would have better lives than we did, and their kids would have better lives than they did. You know, just this past week, the IMF put out a report that said if you look at real economic outcome, China is now the top producer in the world. The United States is at 17.4 trillion. China is at 17.6 trillion. For the first time since Ulysses S. Grant was president, the United States is not the top producer in real outcome. And by the way, this wasn't always the case. Just a little over a decade ago, in 2000, America was 3 times where China was. Do you know that we have today 5 million fewer jobs for people 35 to 54 than we did in December 2007 at the start of the recession? I want you to think about that. 35 to 54, those are your prime earning years. Those are the years you're providing for your kids, you're building your family, and 5 million more people today are not working than was the case in December 2007. Over 1 million teenagers today are not working who were working in December 2007. We just want a big, big victory. But I think it's important for Republicans in Washington to understand this election was not an embrace of Republicans. This election was a repudiation of the path we're on. People across this country said, what we're doing, it isn't working. We want a different path, but it means that Republicans in Washington, it is now incumbent to stand up and lead. It is now incumbent to demonstrate there's a reason to vote for new leaders in Washington. And we need to go in January with a new Republican majority and have big, bold proposals, positive, pro-growth proposals, and demonstrate there's a better way than the path we're on. We need to bring back the American dream. How do you do it? You do it through 3 simple things. Number 1, bring back jobs and growth and opportunity. My number 1 priority since the day I've been elected has been bringing back jobs and growth and opportunity. For a very simple reason. That's the top priority of Texans. I got a job. It's to represent each of you, 26 million Texans. And it doesn't matter where in the state you are. You can be in East Texas or West Texas. You can be in the panhandle of the valley. Texans want jobs and growth and opportunity. And we know how to do it. Growth doesn't come from government, it comes from the men and women in this room. It comes from the private sector. But government can screw it up. Really good at it. And the 2 greatest levers government has to facilitate growth and opportunity are tax reform and regulatory reform. We need leadership in Washington to pass positive pro-growth economic legislation, one after the other, and put them on President Obama's desk. Number 2, we need to defend our constitutional rights. For 6 years, we have seen the federal government coming after constitutional rights of American citizens, the IRS targeting citizens, the government silencing speech, the federal government going after Christian companies like Hobby Lobby, going after the Little Sisters of the Poor. John Kerry signing the UN Small Arms Treaty. You know, oddly enough, whenever Kerry's name comes up, some hissing occurs. As an aside, last year, Jay Leno was in Israel. He was in Jerusalem. And he said, most popular name in Israel right now. Noah. Least popular name. John Kerry. And that leads to the third thing we need to do. We need to restore America's leadership. Yeah. You know, a couple of weeks ago, I was part of a bipartisan delegation, traveled up to Halifax, Canada. It was a defense conference there with about 60 of our allies from all over the world. You had foreign ministers, defense ministers, heads of state. We had bilateral meetings on the margins of the conference throughout the weekend. One after the other of our allies, they all said the same thing. They grab you by the shoulder. They say, "Where is America? What has happened?" They're pleading. They say, "Listen, on Russia, on ISIS, on Iran, on China, we can't do it without America." You know, we just saw news breaking that this White House, there are reports it's considering imposing sanctions on the nation of Israel. At the same time, they are lifting sanctions on Iran. There comes a point, you can't make this stuff up. How absolutely, totally backwards are our priorities right now. And it is my hope with the new Republican majority in the Senate that we see leadership, we see, for example, real oversight, bringing in the IRS and standing up for the citizens who've been targeted. Real leadership, ensuring that no bad deal gets signed with Iran that allows Iran to acquire nuclear weapons. Real leadership that ensures that despite all of this administration's best efforts, the United States stands unshakably alongside our friend and ally, the nation of Israel. Now, in the weeks since the election, President Obama has demonstrated that somehow he wasn't paying attention. President Obama quite rightly said his policies were on the ballot all across the country. And let me tell you, these elections all across the country, I spent 2 months on the road, traveling all over the country, campaigning with Senate candidates to retake the Senate. In just about every Senate race across the country, Republicans stood up and they made 2 key promises. They said, if you elect me, we will do everything humanly possible to repeal Obamacare. And number 2, Republicans all over the country said over and over again, if you elect us, if you give us a Republican Senate, we will stop President Obama's amnesty. This election was a referendum on amnesty. And the results were not ambiguous. It was a tidal wave. We have in January the largest Republican majority in the House of Representatives since the 1920s. I'm told flapper dancing is coming back soon. And yet the president stood up, angry and defiant, unbowed, incensed that the American people would reject what he's demanding.